chairman, and first meeting was 2 weeks ago, so this is my second meeting. But we're going to start the meeting like we normally do with the Historic Zoning Commission. So we'll have a call to order for our meeting to start Thursday, January 23rd, 2024. And Sherry, we have a roll call for the commission members.
Greg Collins.
Here.
Chris Baysor. Aaron Godwin.
Here.
Marcy Hall. Chad Hill.
Here.
Herman Jacobs. Michael Keaton.
Here.
Rebecca Mock. Here. Nita Bentley. Here.
There's Marcy. Is Michael's here? I want to introduce our newest members of the Historic Zoning Commission, Michael Keaton. He was officially appointed at the last mayor and April meeting. Welcome to the commission. And now I'd like to introduce our trainer today, Dr. Bill Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy moved to Jonesborough in 1973 and restored its 1840 home on West Main Street. He soon thereafter became leader with preserving and promoting Jonesborough's history. Dr. Kennedy was a board member with the Jonesborough Civic Trust in the late 1970s and early 1980s, focusing on preservation education and organizing preservation conferences. In 1992, he was founder and president of the Historic Jonesborough Foundation, which promoted and assisted in preservation technology. The Civic Trust and Historic Jonesborough Foundation later merged and became the Heritage Alliance of Northeast Tennessee. He served on the Heritage Alliance Board from 2001 to 2008. In the late 1970s and early 1980, Dr. Kennedy rescued the old Jonesborough High School through adaptive reuse and converted the building into 13 condos. He was also responsible for saving the Eureka Inn. Some other accomplishments include serving on the Board of Advisors for the National Trust of Historic Preservation from 1988 until 2007. In 2020, he received the Tennessee Historical Commission Preservation Leadership Award. He was only the third person to receive the award since it was established in 1975. And for 37 years, Dr. Kennedy served as the chairman for the Historic Zoning Commission from 1983 until 2020. So I have big shoes to fill here. So we are honored to have him here to share his years of knowledge for a series of training sessions about historic zoning. So welcome, Dr. Kennedy.
Thank you. I'm delighted to see everyone, and especially to see our commissioners. And I want to recognize two people who've driven all the way from Nashville to join us, and they are members of the Tennessee Historical staff. They are Lane Tillner, who is a certified local government coordinator for East Tennessee, and Stephen Malinowski. Is that right? Okay, is for the certified local government coordinator for and historic preservation technology for also, or something very similar to for West Tennessee. So we've got Tennessee covered as far as historic preservation is concerned from Tennessee Historic Commission right here with us tonight, which is wonderful. So glad to have you. Well, I want to let you know that we will not be discussing any decisions by the Historic Zoning Commission in the past, nor any applications that are possibly coming before the commission in the near future or in the future. The reason for that is that in a training session, we could get sidetracked off some rabbit hole and delay the real purpose for being here, which is training. What we'll be doing this evening is looking at the basis for historic zoning, specifically in Jonesborough, and we'll be looking at it from a statewide view also, because the state is what enables the local community to have historic zoning. And then we'll be applying what we learned tonight in future sessions. In the second session, we'll be dealing with the building standards and guidelines. In the third session, We'll be dealing with the advertising standards guidelines. The fourth session, we'll be looking at property designation and demolition by neglect and several other miscellaneous things to follow up that the commission usually deals with less frequently than what we have in standards of and guidelines for buildings and for advertising. Those are the two most common things, of course, that the commission deals with. So, well, this is the 55th anniversary of historic zoning in Jonesborough. In 1969, shortly before the board of mayor adopted historic zoning, some of you may know and may remember that the historic residential area suffered and the historic central business district was really dying. And since then, there have been a lot of resources and dedicated people who've come together and revitalized our work that we all love so much and built a foundation of historic zoning, which has been necessary for the revitalization of the town and has formed the foundation for the revitalization of the town. So without the important work of the Historic Zoning Commission, we simply would not have the town that we have today. And I think that's something that all of us need to have in mind and be thankful for. But then the next slide shows simply a list of the 5 documents that we're dealing with tonight. I hope we got a chance to read all of those documents. Some parts of it I would assume that you probably skimmed through, but the main thing is to be familiar with those documents. Notice that they have 5 numbers, and those numbers in the notes will be subscript numbers and or superscript numbers, comments that I'm making in the notes. And what we will give you tonight in the way of presentation will come out to you, be distributed in the notes with responses to the questions that we have tonight sometime next week. So you don't, as we go through the slides, you don't really need to be taking notes. Those of you who are trying to take notes, you can just relax and listen and participate. If any of you have a question that you've got or anything you want to chime in with, feel free to let me know. I'm not thrown off track by an interruption with someone who's got something pertinent that they want to ask or that they want to say. Particular time doing what tonight is primarily presentation, because we only got 2 questions, really. One type of question has to do with enforcement and follow-up. We're postponing that to the second session. And the other type of question has to do with why have 2 historic zones, H1 and H2. And when we get to a particular part in my presentation, we'll deal with that question. Well, let me mention to you some background and overview of session reference materials. So let's see what the next slide shows. Here we're looking at the system numbering things in the code. I hope we can go back and go over it with this slide, with this mic. In the state code, we've got 3 numbers separated by hyphens. 13 is the title. This is state enabling legislation. Document number 1 in your list. Title 13 in the state code is public planning and housing. And if you look down at the example down below of the Jonesborough Code, 11-1005, Title 11 has to do with planning and zoning. So they're parallel in the state and in the town. And the reason I'm going over this is these numbers do have meaning. And if you understand what the numbers are about, then you can really use the numbers and not simply memorize them when they come up or wonder what they are, as I did for many years when I was on the commission. So then the second number in the state code and also in the Jonesborough Code, in the examples that I'm showing there are 7 in the state code. And that's the chapter number. And that simply is the chapter for zoning. And in the Jonesborough Code, 10 is the second number. You see 1005, the first two digits mean something. Sometimes it's only a 3-digit number, such as in 5 only for chapter 5. That's the chapter number. And then the last one or two numbers in this numbering system would be the section 5 or section 05 in the Jonesborough Code is membership. And in the state code, the example that I'm showing you, section 402 is actually separated from the chapter number by hyphen. So the two differ a little. Section 402 in the state code is historic zones established. So they're parallel, and those numbers do mean something. So they're worth paying attention to. And then if we look at the next slide, before we really go to any detail about the 5 documents forming a hierarchy, when referenced in text or in a footnote, the character SS, you'll see, is usually used to designate a section. The section usually is given by all 3 of those numbers that we were just looking at. And a section may be expanded by adding in parentheses additional numbers, lowercase letters, lowercase Roman numerals, and so forth. And a good example of that having to do with historic zoning is section 11.529 in the material that you've received already. So one of the things that I want to mention to you, and by the way, what I'm doing here in the notes and in the slide presentation, giving you some things that are there, but not necessarily obvious. And there are some things that have been helpful to me. There are 5 documents, as you know, in tonight's material, and they form a hierarchy. The state allows Jonesborough to enact historic zoning. It gives the local municipality or county the power to establish historic zoning. Keep in mind that the local municipalities and counties have no power except that which is delegated to it by the state. Is that right, Madam Attorney, County Attorney?
My face to hear you say it.
Okay. Allison Wilkinson here is our county attorney. The Jonesborough's ordinances established local zones years ago, and the Historic Zoning Commission under the power granted by the state enabling legislation. Now, the state enabling legislation was passed in 1965. Jonesborough didn't pass its ordinance, as I just mentioned, won't go until 1970. And as I look back on it, I think, why did Jonesborough take so long? And yet Jonesborough was the first municipality in the state to adopt historic zoning. Beale Street in Memphis had historic zoning before, but it had been a national land. Jonesborough had not come through into historic zoning by any such route. And so we're the first community, not only in terms of having been founded first, being the oldest town in the state, so the first community to adopt historic zoning under those circumstances. But even then, it took us 5 years to get around to do it. So the commission's bylaws then describe the organization and function of the commission. And then the commission's policies and procedures explain how the commission engages with the property owners and the business owners. So that's the hierarchy, going all the way down to relationship with property owners and business owners from the state enabling legislation. So then the next slide, take a look at historic districts. Ordinance Chapter 5, General Provisions Relating to Zoning is the title of Ordinance Chapter 5. If you look down through that long ordinance, you come to section 17, full number being 11.517, we have the establishment of the H1 Historic District. 11.517A is the H2 Overlay District. Notice in its title, it doesn't even say Historic District. So one of the questions that we want to look at is what two historic districts, because we commonly refer to the H2 as being a historic district. And by the way, what do we mean by overlay district? That's multiple zones? Multiple zones, yeah. So those of us who live in a historic zone also live in a residential zone. Most of us either R1 or R2, or we may live in B3, or we may have a business in B3, which is the central business district. And there are a few other land use zones that also have the overlay zones, H1 and H2. So if we look at, if you got your material, if you want to turn to the ordinance, chapter 5, if you look at the ordinance, chapter 5, section 11.517, it's different from, and its purpose from 11.517, the H1 historic district. First of all, if we read from 517, section 517, the H1 historic district, it says that it's the intent of the historic district to preserve historical buildings and sites from the town of Jonesborough. There's also there. If you look at 11.517A, section 11.517A, the H2 overlay district, it is the intent of this district to extend and enhance the historic and visual characteristics of Jonesborough's historic core into adjacent areas while permitting both residential and commercial development. It's the wisdom of the board, mayor and alderman in about 1980 to say we should, because Boone Street, and this is essentially Boone Street, let's take a look at the next one, shows you that maps in front of you. H2 up there, blue on that slide, is essentially Boone Street, the surrounding homes. And because Boone Street is such an important entrance into the historic central business district, in about 1980, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen said, we need to give the Historic Zoning Commission control over the design of those new buildings that we expect eventually to be built on. And that was the rare reason they established the H2 zone. And so they're saying it's the intent to expand and enhance the historic visual characteristics of Jonesborough's historic core into such an adjacent area. And there's a reason that there's a difference between H1 and H2. They really have different purposes. So then, if we go to the next one, if you're ready to go to the next one. For that slide. Here's something that I don't have a slide for. And that is that there are other ordinances that sometime in the Historic Zoning Commission we need to use and refer to. And I want to just list these to bring them to mind. Of course, we have the demolition by neglect ordinance, which is 11.16, and we have chapter 6. Chapter 16 is demolition by neglect. We also have chapter 6, landscaping. We incorporated landscaping into the standards and guidelines of page 2, because we expected to have landscaping needs, new properties in H2. In chapter 8, we have enforcement. Chapter 14, we have home occupations. There's certain home occupations that can be approved in terms of land use within the historic district that would not apply to similar land use zones outside of the historic district. Then in chapter 17, we have outdoor planning. So those are some matters that we occasionally need to refer to on the historic zone. Now, among these 5 documents that you have, language has often been passed down through the hierarchy. The ordinances incorporate language from the state legislation. I hope you've compared the state legislation with the ordinance to see that. Particularly that's true in chapter 5. When we wrote the bylaws and policies and procedures in 1992, we sometimes used the exact wording from the ordinances, especially in the bylaws. In fact, in the bylaws, we included all of the wording, word for word, of the entire chapter 10. And then we added what we felt we needed to that applied specifically to our local historic zoning commission. We were trying to be clear, and we hope to avoid document inconsistencies. The state enabling legislation, ordinances, and bylaws, I hope you've seen, are similar in their orders and arrangement. The policies and procedures, on the other hand, are arranged with the most commonly needed general procedures on page 1, followed by the most frequently used number of procedures for reviewing permit applications. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 on pages 1 and 2. Now, the purpose of the bylaws is to define the way the commission is organized within itself. The purpose of the policies and procedures is to define how the commission relates to property owners and business owners. The Jonesborough Historic Zoning Commission's bylaws contain the clearest and most comprehensive description of the commission's organization and work. So by the time you get through going through all 5 of these documents, the ones that we would refer to the most are chapter 10, bylaws. In fact, the bylaws can stand among the 5 as being the particular document that the Historic Zoning Commission needs to pay attention to the most and will be used the most, uses the most. Now, I've also put down 5 important reminders. Look, here's a map. I'm commenting about that. The 5 important reminders. Why, if you've never seen them before, and I'm calling them reminders because I hope that you will go over them from time to time and remind yourself of them, because they really are. Number 1 is always remember the purposes of historic zoning. The commission is likely to get into trouble when we forget the purposes of historic zoning. And occasionally the commission has been guilty of that. It doesn't tend to happen very often, but it's very important. The second important reminder that I would offer is that the Historic Zoning Commission is a service commission. We tend to think of it as a regulatory commission. And our citizens through the town think of it as a regulatory commission. But it truly is a service commission. And I want to demonstrate to you tonight just why that is. Commission is the proper term. The 4th reminder is the Historic Zoning Commission is not political. But there's some things to have in mind about how do you keep it from being political. And the commission's relationship with the Board of Mayor and Alderman is very important. So with those things in mind, let's go ahead through those particular points. And let's comment a little bit on each one of them. First of all, the purposes of the Historic Zoning Commission. The general purpose that is introduced in section 11.10.01 of the ordinance chapter 10 is to preserve buildings, to ensure the preservation of structures of historic value pursuant to TCA 13.7.401, pursuant to the state and neighborhood legislation. But notice here on this slide, we have 9 purposes in addition to preserving buildings, protecting buildings. I find 9 hard for me to remember. So in my way of thinking, I've divided them into 3 sides, three different groups that I can remember pretty well. Building and size would be number 1. Then history and heritage is the second group that I think of, and then the economy. Now, what I've done in this slide is that I've underlined all of the words that seem to address regulation. And there are 4 out of 9 of the specific purposes that address regulation. Preserve and protect, number 1. Number 2, regulate. Number 3, regulate. I hope all can see the slides. Then down number 8, protect the town's attractions, residents, and tourists and visitors. Those are the 4 that have to do with regulation. That means that the majority of the purposes of the Historic Zoning Commission are not regulatory. But we spend most of our time on those 4 regulatory purposes. When we go out and visit with property owners and when we write articles for the newspaper and when we talk about historic zoning in our meetings and outside of our meetings, we really should keep in mind the purposes that are not regulatory. 4, both the people's education, cultural, economic, and general welfare, and safeguard the town's history and heritage. Stabilize and improve property values. What if Academy Hill had been torn down and replaced by a motel in the late 1970s, which developer Charlie Lewis wanted to do? What if we had lost 300 West Main Street to demolition by neglect? What if we had lost to demolition by neglect the stabilize and improve property values? The reason I mentioned those examples is, what do you think would have happened to the property values in the neighborhood around those structures if we had lost those structures? Foster civic pride in the value of notable accomplishments. Strengthen the economy. Enhance the visual and aesthetic character, diversity, and interests. Do you suppose for a moment that without historic zoning, the town would have gone to the trouble and the expense and the utilities, such as the Johnson City Power Board, as Private Bridge was named back then, would have gone to the trouble of United Telephone, as we had back then, would have gone to the trouble and expense and put out money and made grants to put the wires in. to make the sidewalks, to make the curbs stone. Put up lights that imitated our original late 19th century light burned kerosene that was made by the Jonesborough company. Raise those questions. Without historic zoning, would we have those enhancements in our central business district now? I don't think so. Well, the next one. Here's what we had in the 1960s. Signs that actually cover features of buildings. They imitated the Wild West movies that had started as a fad in approval making in the 20s. And some of you are shaking your head, well, it's old design, and we remember very well what those Wild West movies look like, the scenes look like when we were children. And of course, those movies are still. Then the next slide. So the Historic Zoning Commission, I maintain, based on those purposes, is a service commission. Even in its regulatory power, it seems to me that it's a service commission. It serves property owners as a guiding resource for maintaining historic character while accommodating modern needs. It serves business owners by encouraging creativity in unity with the overall character of the historic central business district. And that's incorporated into our sign guidelines, advertising guidelines. It serves residents of Jonesborough by helping to preserve and enhance the quality of life in the historic districts. Those of us who live in the historic district really know what it means to be there. We enjoy living there. I've lived there since 1973, and I wouldn't want to live outside. And I'm looking at some of you smiling who also live in the historic district. We love it. It serves the general public in its role to maintain the historic character of a place where genuine history occurred and is still visible. We haven't had to make up fictitious history or create some sort of an area where old buildings are imitated in order to bring people from entertainment. We're a place where genuine history occurred, and it's still visible in our wonderful buildings, many of which are museum quality. It serves the residents, businesses, and general public by helping to provide the staging for the arts, storytelling, theater, and helping to provide the staging for a wide variety of celebrations. The Christmas parade, July 4th celebration, chocolate fest, and go on and on and on, almost every weekend during warm weather months. Would we have that if we didn't have historic zoning and work of the Historic Zoning Commission? I doubt it. We might have some of it. I don't think we would have as much as we do. Then let's go to the next step. Commission is the arbiter. It's not a committee. If you call it a committee, then that suggests that it's advisory. It's not advisory, it's part of the local government, as we've just been describing. If you call it a board, then that tends to confuse it with the board of Mayor and Alderman. And it's not a part of the board of Mayor and Alderman. It also tends to confuse it with the board of the nonprofit organizations such as the Heritage Alliance. It's distinct as a commission, and we do have other commissions. We have the Tree and Townscape Commission. We have the Planning Commission. It's actually part of the government of Jonesborough. And we need to keep that in mind. That carries with it distinction, but it also carries with it responsibility. And let's take a look at the next. By the way, many communities, well, I should say many states, call what we call a historic zoning commission, they call it an architectural review board. And when I've attended meetings and conferences, and I've heard people from other states refer to it, I've always heard them say architectural review board. They never just say board. And that makes it distinct in those states. But ours is different than Tennessee and historic zoning commission. And that emphasizes that it's an overlay zone superimposed on land use zone. Well, we are a part of the government, but we don't have an office in that. But we get a lot of support. So then let's take a look at the next stuff. The Historic Zoning Commission is not political. That's the fourth important reminder that I'm not offering. First of all, there's the terms of service. The Historic Zoning Commissioners are appointed for 5 years, 5-year terms. And that means that the terms of only 2 commissioners, if the pattern is being followed, expire every year. The aldermen serve 4-year terms. They are set to expire 2 of the 4 aldermen every 2 years. The mayor has a 2-year term, so it has to run again every 2 years. And what this means is that in the case of the Historic Zoning Commission, if the normal pattern is possible and is being followed, only 2 of 9 commissioners are changed every 2 years. That's less than 25% turnover every 2 years. In the case of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, it's possible that 3 out of 5 members of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen could change every 2 years. That's more than 50%. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Now, what that does is to provide more stability for the Historic Zoning Commission than the Board of Mayor and Aldermen have. Now, as you know, we have a very stable situation with our Board of Mayor and Aldermen. That's wonderful. We don't have term limits. And we're thankful that we don't. Our voters determine term limits. And we don't have term limits for the Historic Zoning Commission. Our mayor and Board of Aldermen, Board of Mayor and Aldermen, determine the term limits for each of the serving Historic Zoning Commissioners. Of course, other factors come in that break the pattern. Things that happen that change the lives and capabilities of various commissioners and various members of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. My point is that somehow or another, those 2 relationships and terms have been set up with a net result that there's a certain degree of protection from political whims and short-term political instability for the Historic Zoning Commission. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad it did. And I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind. And the reason it's important is that our property owners need to be able to depend on consistency of the work of the Historic Zoning Commission. And they need to be able to depend on the Historic Zoning Commission not reversing a decision that it's made 1 year in the next year or two. We had a very interesting situation a few years ago when a group came over looking at restaurant opportunity from Ashton. And when I met with them, the big thing on their mind was whether or not we were consistent. They wanted to know if we approved their plans, would we be reversing them in the next year or two? Because that's exactly what had happened to them in Ashton. And they were not going to business in Ashton because at the time, and this has probably been 15, 20 years ago, at the time they felt that they could not depend on Ashland's consistency, proving or disproving their plans, their signage, many other aspects that had to be approved by the Historic Zoning Commission. Then there's the appeals process. The appeal for the Historic Zoning Commission in Tennessee is court. My guess is that it probably will be the Chancery Court. You think?
Sounds like it logical. We'll find out.
Well, we don't need to find that. Just don't know what
What we can tell.
but maybe it can be the Chancery. Usually, the property owner who disagrees with the decision made by the Historic Zoning Commission simply goes back and regroups upon the advice of members of the Historic Zoning Commission, changes the proposal and brings it back. Because the zoning commission would then treat it as a new proposal, regardless of how small the change may be that the individual has made. Got a reference to that in the notes, and I'm not seeing it right now. Yes, it's in the policies and procedures, paragraph 6, page 1. That if the commission doesn't approve a proposal, property owner just needs a business and just needs to change it, no matter how small, and break that. Work with them. And the commission does work with the property owners, I think, very well. At least certainly in my experience. So that's one other thing that can keep the Historic Zoning Commission's work from becoming political. Because what happens if there's no way to appeal fairly easily is that the aggrieved property owner or business owner ends up talking with members of the board of mayor. But in Tennessee, they need to be talking with the courts because the board of mayor and aldermen is not the appeals place. It does not handle the appeals process in Tennessee. In most states, the board of mayor and aldermen or the equivalent of it, the city council, by local municipal form of government that is the appeals, handles the appeals. And of course, that means that the appeal can be put right in the pile of aside as a solvent process. And then the work of the Historic Zoning Commission begins to lose its stability and probability. And that way, business people and homeowners and property owners of other types then begin to lose their ability to be able to rely on the work of the Historic Zoning Commission. So that's a very, very fortunately, the Historic Zoning Commission has never been taken forward. We've come pretty close a few times. Never been taken forward. And I think that's one of the mechanisms by which we've been able to avoid the few threats of court that we've ever had. But then the next important reminder that I want to give you is the relationship with the Board of Mayor and Alderman is very important. First of all, the Board of Mayor and Alderman provides staff keeping services to the Historic Zoning Commission. It often seeks advice from the Historic Zoning Commission for public facilities. It provides enforcement of the Historic Zoning Commission decisions. And Frank and I have the forum next Wednesday morning at 10:30 with Lynn Rosenwald to review that aspect down Jonesborough's board with the Historic Zoning Commission. It provides legal services if needed. If the Historic Zoning Commission is taken to court, or if the Historic Zoning Commission itself takes a property, then it's the Board of Mayor and Alderman that has to provide the legal services involved. And there's no budget for the Historic Zoning Commission to do that. So Historic Zoning Commissioners need to be sensitive and aware of the political challenges faced by Mayor and Alderman. They've got a big job to do. Their job is far more broad than the job of the Historic Zoning Commission. The Historic Zoning Commission is assumed to be a specialized commission, and therefore it is given greater credence and greater respect in historic matters than other groups in town, including the Pope. And that's one of the basis for which in historic matters we have a good working relationship with the Board of Mayor and Alderman, meaning that relationship. In Jonesborough, we've got a long history of close, pleasant, and productive relationships with the Board of Mayor and Alderman and the town staff. So let's take a look at the next slide. Questions. If you've got questions, send them to me directly or to Frank. Frank prefers to see them first, and I think that's good. As chairman of the Historic Zoning Commission. So there's our contact information. And the next training session will be Thursday, February 27th at 6 p.m. right here in the Historic Commonwealth Business Center. And then the next slide is my congratulations to those of you who have been appointed to the Historic Zoning Commission. Responses. By the way, I think we have a lot more questions next issue in the following issues. Yes.
I did have a question on the one slide about the terms of service. Said that every year 2 members' terms expired, but then in 2 years, only 2 commissioners to be replaced.
No,
The math doesn't add up.
Yeah, that doesn't add up.
It'll be only 4 non-commissioners change every 2 years. Is that correct?
We have 5-year terms in the Historic Zoning Commission. They're set up to stagger. So the terms expire for 2 members. That means one year we'd have only 1 term expire.
And a person on the committee can be asked to stay on the committee by the mayor,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Well, given new people, you'll still have 4 new commissioners every 2 years.
Your math is right.
Okay.
For.
Just want to make sure.
And I think one of the things that Rebecca really pointed out that helps a lot is that we really have a lot of people that have been on more than 1 term. So I'm kind of one of the baby commissioners. Although I'm not the newest one now, but but it is a very stable commission that a lot of people have served.
You're right. If we get two new commissioners in 1 year, next year we get two more new commissioners. And that would be four relatively new commissioners. Two additional commissioners, yes, that's good. So the turnover theoretically could be faster than I was presenting.
It's still with 9 commissioners, that's a very good, stable situation.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Yes, we used to be 5. When I first went on the commission, we were 5. And I think we were all going to be expanded to 9.
And I suspect, Bill, that the way your math ended up a little incorrect in the slide is because it's 2 members each year. So in a given year, it's going to be 2 of 9 there. But because the mayor and aldermen were right under that with the 2 years, I think it all got a little smashed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll look into the notes to see if that's.
Sure you can.
All right, yeah, all right.
Does the board have any oversight, those are all the meetings?
No,
With that, you'll have to move forward, be advised of the source.
to get what?
You have to go to the issue, make that final score, the legal part, you have to go to DNA. To get,
Yes.
and that's details is on one.
Well, okay, yes, they do. They, of course, have oversight on the appointment of commissioners.
Yes.
That's very clear. The other thing is that when the Historic Zoning Commission passes new guidelines or amends its standards and guidelines, we customarily have always taken those to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and asked for their input. Approval. That's been a custom, but it's not, even that's not required. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Thank you, Brian. Anybody else?
Can we talk about that suit you were wearing in the first picture? Can we talk about the suit you were wearing here? I want to know. I mean, this is something. I love it, Doc.
He's talking about that.
He's talking about.
Oh, that's
Who is that guy?
yeah. That was, when was that from? That's
1980, the cornerstone of Academy Hill.
I love it.
laying the cornerstone, the new cornerstone, Academy Hill in 1980. Okay.
Dr. Kennedy, I have just one thing to let people know that Dr. Kennedy was very involved in that wasn't on your list, is you helped save the house back on the hill here and save all the brick and all the woodwork and all the mantles, and it got moved to very close to your house and it was rebuilt. Instead of demolition when the
And Chad lives there now.
Chad helps the lives there now, and he's on the Historic Zoning Commission. Chad, raise your hand, please. Stand up, take a bow. Thank you. That was a good project.
yes,
We had a lot of things.
big project.
It was a heritage alliance project. Brick by brick. I didn't physically handle all the bricks. Yes, yes, the Oak Hill School in a small way. One of the challenges we had in moving the Oak Hill School in was, do we consider it to be a new building? And some of you may be aware that in historic preservation, generally speaking, we really frown on moving buildings. It's almost a no-no in historic preservation. Because then you leave the site, you leave the archaeology potentials of the site when you move the building, relocate it. So we went back and forth, well, is it a building or is it a museum artifact? And we decided it's a museum artifact. And we debated about that for several months as to how to treat it. Because we had decided by that time that it had been probably not the best thing to move the Christian Taylor House, and especially to put the Christian Taylor House in the location where it is, right on the little knoll between the Presbyterian Church, which is the only 19th century building designed by an architect. It's in the historic district, and the Chester, which is now a state-owned historic site. We felt it was a terrible site to put that. The Christopher Taylor House on that particular site, and maybe it probably should not have been moved in the first place. But if it hadn't been moved, it would have been demolished. People, Burton Rubber, would come in to establish their factory there. So they would have demolished it. So the Hawkins family, which by the way is the same family that owns 119 East Clinton Street now, Central Business District. Hawkins family gave it to the town, and it got removed. So we were still in that frame of mind and discussion when the Oakville School was moved. That's why we went through the debate. Okay, are we going to have our historic district someday be made up significantly of buildings that have been relocated into the historic district? Or are we going to keep the historic district more or less pure with buildings that are still on their original sites, that were built on their original sites within the historic district? Are we diluting and therefore cheapening the historic district by having these buildings moved into the historic district, primary buildings, not outbuildings? So we were still going round and round about that when the Oakville School was moved in. And those of us who were concerned about such things, I think, gained a lot of comfort when we began saying, okay, it's for the museum, it really is a museum artifact. Let's go ahead and move it in, use it for our programs, for our heritage programs, which indeed it has been used very, very successfully as a certain purpose. But it's a museum artifact rather than a movie. Yes. Yes, Herman.
Also, there was a poem. Mine.
Yes. Yes, yes. And an addition was made to it. Steve Bacon did that. By the way, we got word today that Ernie Bacon, Steve's father, died yesterday. Some of you may know Ernie, and some of you probably know Steve. Steve still owns property on East Main Street here in Jonesborough. He was one of our partners in the Eureka Inn. And Chris, here.
Curious if that had been, or if it had fallen in disrepair. I think it's the purpose.
That happened before the Star Scene was passed. And I don't know the exact year, but it was replaced by a store that was a service station, the Sinclair service station. And then later it was a paint store. When we came to town, it was a paint store. And then the site was purchased by the town and made available for the Christian Taylor House.
Johnson House came down like 1940.
1940, okay. Gordon, thank you.
I'll put a plug in for it's really your warehouse, but tell me about the architectural warehouse and its purpose, and Bill started it. So,
Well, we realized when we moved to Jonesborough and when we were working on preservation and education in the 1970s, that we really needed finishing terms that would match our historic columns, especially bricks. We also needed good finishing terms, as especially with bricks. The way we got onto this was that we needed some fairly significant brick repairs on the back of our house. And we went to the expense of getting reproduction bricks, so-called reproduction 19th century bricks from Old Carolina Brick Company in Salisbury, North Carolina. They didn't match. And we might as well not to the tree. They cost arm and a leg to buy and another arm and a leg to get them shipped to. And so we've left them exposed on the back of our house as a reminder, an important reminder that we need to use salvage bricks. But the same is true to a slightly less extent with wood finish materials. So we started accumulating them in our backyard and in our garage and other outbuildings that we have in 400 West Main Street. And eventually it became virtually overcoming. We had a salvage person who would come to me, and his name was Smith Peters. And Mr. Smith Peters would call me up and said, I've got another house. And I'd go with him to the house and I'd say, okay, I take all of your interior, double beam, tunnel roof, take all of your lap siding, and I'll take your manholes and your doors. And he'd pull them all out, load them up on a truck and bring them to me, and we found a place for them somewhere on the property. Well, Richard Deal had a Deal truck down on Depot Street, had a warehouse that he was not using. And somehow or another, I found out about it, and I persuaded Richard to let us move all our salvage stuff to his warehouse he wasn't using. And I think we gave him a token amount, and a little agreement with him to pay him $1. But it was, of course, just to help out. By that time, we had the Historic Jonesborough Foundation. And then he became worried as he grew older and grew closer to retirement. He became worried about liability, with us going back and forth getting him salvage material in his ordinance. And so he named me a price for it, and whatever it was very cheap. And I coughed up the money, bought it as a contribution to the nonprofit organization. And that's how we got the grants. And of course, we've continued with the salvage since then. And Gordon has managed the warehouse for the past 7 years. How many years?
I think we're 7 or 8.
7 or 8 years.
And Steve helps me to out. Lots of folks have helped over the years, but it's a Heritage Alliance thing that we, so come and see us when
We passed it on to the Heritage Alliance. So we got, well, and I got a merit award from the Tennessee Historical Commission for the well worth money. What else? That time.
In the Dr. Kennedy, the one thing that Richard Deal had stored in that warehouse when we were doing the Chester Inn, I needed to secure 12 mantelpieces. There were no mantles left in the building. I learned Bill had one, so that left 11. And I went over to the warehouse and picked up mantles, sent them all over to Rogersville to have them stripped and sanded, brought them all back from Rogersville, getting ready to put them into the Chester Inn, and I get a message. Do you have Richard Deal's mantelpiece? The one thing he had stored in the warehouse. So I had to return Richard's mantelpiece and find another one.
Wow. He's storing that and that story.
There's some things we don't like to tell you.
And on that note, we very dutifully keep some other stored in items there, very, very secure.
Anything else? Yes, Matt.
Good question, maybe more personal than the session, but if you decide if you would like to answer them or not. The first would be over the 40 years that you were a public commissioner, what would you say was your greatest achievement? The second question would be, if we were to look ahead 40 years, what would you desire to have happen through the historic zoning commission?
Well, I think the greatest accomplishment was just to be there and to do work. As I said in the last slide, go back to the last slide, for you all read it, I know. For me, it was a joy to be on the commission. And I would commend that to India. There's no greater town that I can imagine anywhere to be of service to and to participate in maintaining and continuing to develop things. And that's so there's no one great accomplishment. It's a matter of years of joyous growth from my point of view. And so what I would hope to see in the future is, of course, that work continued. And I'm very optimistic about it. For one thing, we have an exceptionally good support among our citizens here in Jonesborough for the work of the Historic Zoning Commission. Anytime people get upset with this over a historic matter having to do with the Historic Zoning Commission, at least in the past few decades, it has been when they felt that the Historic Zoning Commission was not doing an adequate job, letting them down. And right now we've got criticism for lack of enforcement. In other words, the Historic Zoning Commission people are watching. They want you to do a good job, and they want you to do a better job somehow on enforcement than you've been doing in the past year or two. That's the kind of criticism that we've had. One time, I'll tell you this story very quickly about the closure of Pastor. Years ago, Herman remembers this, and I think Marcia remembers it. Years ago, one of the businessmen by the name of Frank Cassell wanted to build a hardware store that became Ace Hardware on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 11E. And in order to have the space to build it, he requested that the town close one block of Pastor, and Pastor was the northern border of the original frigate, original flag of the town of Jonesborough. So the board mayor and alderman considered it, and Hubert Miller is a member of the board mayor and alderman, a very prominent member. He had been high vote getter for several elections. And he supported Frank Cassell on that. And a guy named Terry Catamine rose up from the community as a general citizen of the community and circulated a petition against closing Pastor. He got over 800 signatures. They had the second reading for closing Pastor, that one block, right here in this town, in this room. And I remember vividly, I was standing over there, about where that receptacle is, next to Frank Cassell. And I thought, of course, I get along, try to get along with everybody. And Frankie and I were friends, and I told Frankie, I said, Frankie, even though I'm against this, and he knew I was against it, if this passes and you build your store, I'll be one of your customers. Won't make any difference. There was standing room only in this room, and there were people all scattered through this room that I had never seen before, who stood up and impassioned ways pled with the Board of Mayor and Aldermen not to pass this ordinance that would close business. And one of the most common reasons given, and this was the one that they were most impassioned about, was that we were developing more and more festivals and gatherings and celebrations downtown. And we were having more and more people gathering in the central business district. And so these people that I had never seen before, didn't know, who lived here in Jonesborough in the years, were saying, you've got to keep every matter of egress out of the central business district open and available for emergencies. And High Street is one such place. So those safety. And then there were other people who were somehow just in general not wanting to give a businessman, a single businessman, a special privilege. There was a sentiment there, of course, and there was also the sentiment, well, it's always been there and it's part of the original plight of the town of Jonesborough, and therefore, from a historic point of view, it should not be closed. Of course, that was a rather weak argument among a lot of the people. They passed. They closed High Street. They had an election. Terry Callahan ran. And so did Hugo Blue. Terry Callahan came in with the highest number of votes. Hugo Blue lost the election. And that demonstrated to me how much people respect the historic district that I don't even know. We live outside the historic district, out in the county, out in the, and we get that fairly often.
Plus, the town's been originally going to give Frankie Sells that property.
Oh, yes, that was another problem. To give the businessman
Give it free.
such a property without charging. I think Frankie ended up paying a little bit,
He paid $20,000.
$20,000 for.
We went to court.
Oh, you went to court.
We went to court.
She was sick. It was weird. I know, I forgot you. Was up for it. See? Yeah. Robert?
Pretty much. That was sort of about. Second thing, about this.
Yeah. 300 West Main. We saved that under demolition neglect, so we could be talking about that in fourth session, but just briefly. The property owners who had inherited it, neglected it and allowed it to go down. And they applied a couple of times at least, maybe 3 times, to the Historic Zoning Commission for demolition. They wanted to put a double in place of it. And of course, the Historic Zoning Commission did not approve it, because otherwise it would be inconsistent with the surrounding. So finally, as they neglected it through a period of years, and we went through the steps of enforcing our ordinance and stimulus from that neglect, which is very tedious, which took several years to do. In that process, we got an engineer to come, evaluate the house, and he came up with some design ideas as to how the house could be saved, despite the fact that there was an actual tree growing on one corner of the house, when the roof was not intact, it was the second floor. The porch became so unstable that we finally approved demolition of the front porch, provided that they would let us document the front porch, which meant careful measurements, careful drawings, and so forth, which we did. And then finally, these were 2 sisters who owned the house. As we went along through the tedious steps of enforcing the ordinance against demolition, that one of the sisters died. And a young contractor by the name of Ken Wolf called me. Kelly is now 55. I don't think he would mind my telling that. He was in his 20s. And he said, Bill, what do you think? Should I call Ms. Herndon, his and sister, and just offer to buy that property and restore it? And I said, go to it, Kelly. The worst thing she can do is to curse you and hang up. He said, get prepared for something like that. Just call her up, see what you can do. And she agreed to sell it to him. And then he restored the house. That's a brief story of 300 West Village.
Walls house, make sure you have that. So Charlie lives. We need to set up there and.
Charles' house? No, it wasn't Charlie Lewis. It was somebody else. They were toying with the idea of, let me think just a minute. You're saying the bronze. What is that? Ruth Brawls.
Yeah.
Okay, the Cunningham. We know it as the Cunningham. That's right. It's the pre-Civil War house behind Main Street Cafe and behind the Johnson Theater. Right. There was consideration being given at one time with demolishing that house and putting the Wendy's there. And I'm so glad, of course, Wendy's is now being built up there in the lake, which is where it belongs. I thought it was a good thing. You might know it's still found, but our connection is.
It looks like some kind of.
Yeah, yeah, sure. His name is Jack Strickle. And he and I, let's say, laughed about it several times since the idea of putting windows.
Oh,
And those for those,
from
we started
here,
central businesses.
from where I'm sitting.
And then think that's what it and
Oh, yeah, this was really weird.
of course, I don't, it was so ridiculous.
When I got closer to the thing, no, but it was as you go. But from
Well, I
over
think it's all.
it looked like.
Think I'll just,
I appreciate this is happening. That's
so it's a big deal, she laid her egg.
Move on with the regular general.
Hurricane.
Now, hurricane being here. Continue on February 27th. And you're probably seeing you again. And by the way, I want for you commissioners especially, I want you all to meet these folks that came in here all with and asked to join us. Stevie and Lane, appreciate so much your help. Frank, you get back to you.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you.
So now we've got the regular business of the Historic Zoning Commission. Everyone's welcome